do you guys think there is actually enough political pressure on the government to take the recommendation seriously when the commission is finished? Thanks.
I do not have any direct experience or detailed knowledge of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But what I do know is that the commissioners had direct experience of what happened during the apartheid period. I know, for example, that Lamisa went to prison for 4 years. And I'm sure that the experiences that all of those commissioners had during that period informed them and directed them as to how they were going to operate during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that really is a big plus. When I look at the Farnham Commission and I see, does anyone there, any of the commissioners, have any experience at all of what it's like to be a miner, working underground, living in the shacks? We all know what the answer is. It is a resounding no. And that is a defect, and perhaps something that we could have learned, or should have been learned, from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we end up with 3 lawyers who effectively have no experience. Now, the trouble about lawyers is that most of them think they've got some God-given right to pronounce on every single subject in the universe. I don't think that's right. And I think if they'd looked around and taken into account what had happened in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they might have come up with other alternative commissioners who had some experience, or at least had done some research. I mean, I've read stuff by a man called Gavin Hartford, and I thought, well, he sounds like a good guy. He could have been a commissioner. He sounds pretty good. He sounds pretty evenly balanced. He seems to advise the mining houses. He also seems to advise the trade unions. I'd give him a bit of a tick, and perhaps Callie Forrest, I'd give her a bit of a tick too. There. So I think that was a big defect, and that seems to me to be something that could have learned, because the consequence of it is this: when you sit and you sit at the commission, and even when you go to other functions, you know, what I tend to pick up is that people look at what happened through the eyes of authority. You know, the police did bad. We've got to change that. They didn't do this right, so we've got to change that. And of course that is right. I'm not saying that that shouldn't be done. Of course that should be done. But whoever looked at it through the eyes of the miners, even when it comes to the language that is used, the language against the miners and the strikers is incomparably more harsh. And you look at what happens to them, say for example, no one turned around and said, what were the miners thinking about on the 13th, when the following had happened? On the 10th, they'd been attacked on 3 separate occasions by London security for doing absolutely nothing. On the 11th, Nome had tried to murder them. On the 12th, and here I don't seek to exonerate what happened to the 2 guards, that were bloody awful there, but on the 12th, they were attacked yet again by 8 London security. And on the 13th, an unprovoked attack that murdered 3 miners. Imagine Mr. Nocky going back to the mountain after all of that. And he's trying to address them, saying, for God's sake, what's going on here? We're being attacked. We're being killed. We're being murdered. No one looks at it through the eyes of the miners. And that is one of the problems about how the Commission operated. And it just seemed to me that, looking at the experience of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, some things could have been learned.
Thank you.
In terms of political will, difficult one to answer when we haven't seen the recommendations in the report yet. But I think it's instructive to go back to the question of why there haven't been prosecutions following the TRC, which becomes a question around will there be prosecutions coming out of the Foreign Commission report. Is for me the reason why we haven't seen systematic prosecutions of apartheid-era perpetrators is a combination of 3 factors. On the one hand, the principle of equivalence, which was implemented by the Commission, was profoundly offensive to significant sections of the ANC, and particularly for Thabo Mbeki. So that what we saw was, when the new administration moved in 1999, the state's approach to the Commission just changed completely. But I think a direct link to what that principle of equivalence would have meant for prosecutions is that perpetrators within the liberation movements would have to have seemed to have been prosecuted as well. And that became a hot potato politically I think the second factor was that already that process had been compromised by the appointment into positions of power of people we know were perpetrators. Buthelezi in cabinet, Neil Barnard, senior government official, and so on and so on. But the third one is what I would call blackmail by former state operatives. I don't know if any of you have read this book that Neil Barnard's just published. It's clear that he has access to intelligence records, and without naming people, he constantly infers that people in senior positions today are deeply compromised and that that information could be made available very easily. So the political will just wasn't there to begin implementing systematic prosecution. In relation to the Farlam Commission, if the recommendations include things like transforming the political economy of the Platinum Belt, holding Lonmin and other mining companies accountable, transforming SAPs, these deeper structural imperatives, then I don't think there will be any political will at all to implement them.
Yeah, there certainly wasn't any political will by the Department of Minerals to exercise any oversight over London social labour plans. So yeah, questions to answer. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of unanswered questions around Marikana, and I'm coming back to Mr. Magiwana's question. You know, I mean, who will get prosecuted and who will get accountable? Who will be held accountable? And you know, when I was thinking about it, I remembered the three people who were killed at scene 1 on August 16th, and that's Mr. Yona, Mr. Nze, and Tebisile Yawa, whose dad is here today. They were killed by shotgun pellets, and I mean, SAP's banned using shotgun pellets for a long time. Which of those policemen decided to take shotgun pellets to Marikana on that day, and what was their intention? I mean, those sort of questions then sort of raise real questions around sort of premeditation and what individual policemen wanted to do on the day. And I mean, there was enough forensic capacity to sort of to track where bullets and which bullets came from which guns, etc. I mean, so you know, yeah. I mean, will police be held accountable? Individual people, leadership, even people in cabinet, etc. I think not. I mean, I think it's been very much Pierre as a scapegoat, and I mean, she's expendable. She'll get a new job in a couple of months' time somewhere else. It'll be fine. But yeah, the inherent structural and specific accountability, I don't really see it happening. So.
Thank you. Just picking up on Niren's issue there on the shotgun pellets. One of the things we were involved in assisting with, in partnership with others, was to try and track the relationship between, to do additional ballistics work, because the first round done officially, there was only, well, I'm not going to comment, but there were difficulties in relation to those kind of weapons that were not handed in at all. They were not handed in for the official investigation. Secondly, there were 9mm pistols that were not handed in for investigation. So you had a complete loss of a vital piece of evidence for ballistic examination, just not in the mix for the analysis. Then you had the impact of high-velocity rifles. Again, that was something we had some involvement in supporting the work on, which cause huge damage to the body, and there's fragmentation, which creates a difficulty of relating the fragments to the weapon fired. So at a level of evidence, establishing individual responsibility in relation to the shooters will be difficult. And other people have already commented that with 2 exceptions, no shooters were called to give evidence and be put to the test. On the political issue that I think Byrne has raised, there was a very interesting encounter between de Kock and President Zuma that went on for some hours in the prison that Eugene de Kock was in until very recently. And I think it's okay for me to say this, but prior to that encounter with President Zuma at the prison, de Kock was cooperating with the families who still wanted to know what had happened to their relatives who disappeared, where their bodies were buried, who else was involved in the incidents that resulted in their deaths. But after the encounter with the president, there was no further cooperation, and only those two men know what happened in that conversation. On the political will, just one further comment to the questioner. There are other very significant cases currently going on in which the political will disastrously relates to which grouping is in charge of prosecution decisions or pressure on prosecution decisions at the NDPP level or at the Hawks senior level and so forth. And this is creating a very volatile environment for prosecutions of cases that are going to be inherently difficult anyway. So I think it's going to be a struggle, and I think various organisations have already identified the need for a prolonged campaign to stay on the backs of the authorities, that you can't drop the ball on this one because your whatever interests might be badly affected.
Thank you.